not working, great. You figure out a way that doesn't work, fail more and fail faster.
I'm early in the book at the moment, but there's a crazy stat that I didn't realize, that Yahoo back in the day had the opportunity to buy Google for $1 million and didn't do it. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode in the Leadership Blueprint. Really excited to be joined today by Allan Abbas. I think his journey is really unique for a number of reasons, and I'm just going to touch on some of those now. And then, of course, he's going to go into a lot more detail for you as we get going. But to give you the overview, Alan's got this unique journey of working with Amazon, leaving, starting his own company, successfully selling it, going back to Amazon, leaving them again, and setting up another company. And all this off the back of watching his own father build a business to a multi-million-dollar business and having a really successful career. So I think Alan's kind of got this really unique entrepreneurship within his blood from his family. He's then done it himself. He's then done the corporate. He's gone back, he's gone forward. And what he's doing at the minute is Fintech in Saudi Arabia. And he's going to tell you more about this in a moment. So I think it's a really exciting journey. And I'm going to be really interested to ask him, what made him go back. So I'm looking forward to this one. So Allan, thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited to have you on the episode. And as mentioned, kind of if you give people a little bit more meat on the bones of that kind of basic intro I gave there, and then we'll dive into a few specific questions in rock and roll from there, as I say. But again, thanks so much for joining us, and kind of over to you, mate.
Thanks, Oliver. No, lovely intro. You got it spot on. I grew up loving the idea of being able to sell something. I've done it in school, selling CDs, back when music was hard to get by. And I've also got a knack for efficiency. I like things to be efficient, which later meant a long time at Amazon, making operations efficient. But deep inside, I've always wanted to create my own thing. Like you mentioned, my dad was the one who did it first. So I grew up thinking that's what's normal. I thought everyone did that. So I was a bit surprised to find out that we're supposed to apply to jobs in university and progress on a career and things like that. But when I found that out, I thought, okay, let me go for a job that sounds cool. So I looked for jobs at Tesla, Amazon, Apple, and obviously most of them rejected me, but you only need one to work. And that was the one that worked for me.
Okay. Because your Amazon sort of career, that was, like you said, within physically the warehouse operations and real efficiency on the ground, wasn't it?
It couldn't get more on the ground than that. I started in the fulfillment centers. If anyone's ordered anything that came in an Amazon box, that's where I worked. We had all the items in storage. I started right after university, actually managing a small team of people. I packed a lot of boxes myself, and I worked my way up from packing boxes to managing people that pack boxes to launching centers that have people managing people. And eventually I made it to corporate, where we were planning supply chains of the whole country and planning where those centers should be and things like that. So I've done it from the ground all the way to the corporate level. And there's a lot of fun in that. That's where I learned to lead. I've picked up a lot of things that are fun from Amazon. And like any corporate, there's also bad habits that you get that you need to be very careful not to take into your startup. And that's what I'm trying to be very aware of.
Okay. And, as I touched on at the start there, you were with those guys, you left, you ran your own first business, successfully grew it to over $1 million, sold it, and you went back. Why go back? Because, there's nothing wrong with going back to even another corporate or something, but the same corporate, was it you hadn't achieved everything you wanted at Amazon? Was it, I just wondered, even the same corporate, what made you go back to the same guys again?
No, fair question. So I grew my startup to about $1 million in sales in the first year. I didn't sell the startup, but we ended up shutting down, but maybe we'll touch upon that later. After the startup, I was burnt out, to be honest. Taking a business from the ground up takes everything from you. It's not just time, but you have to put part of your soul in it. And I had an honest conversation with myself. I was not ready to do another startup. I was not able to, get it to a level where I want. So I thought, let me take a break and join a corporate job build up my savings, build up a new set of skills. So instead of operations, when I went back, it was more product and program management, which I thought was missing in my first startup. So I tried to go pick up the skills that I needed to succeed again at my startup. Yeah, and that's how it happened. Why Amazon? Was the easiest thing to go back to where you are. And I remember taking a look at other companies. I was actually, a lot of the things we hear that makes Amazon a crappy place to work were the things that drew me to it. I wanted that intensity. I wanted a culture where, it doesn't matter how old you are, what you look like, your results speak for themselves. And that's something Amazon does very well. They're very data centric, almost to a fault
Mm-hmm. Okay.
for the
So,
humans.
yeah.
But and I, Yeah, and I got an opportunity to go back to a better role. I already had the connections, I've already had credibility. So it was a few messages to get me back there, whereas going somewhere else would have meant, going through the job hunting process that I'm sure a lot of us don't have a good experience with. And I also got a nice pay upgrade, so why not?
Absolutely. I think when pay upgrade is always a good one. And I think, yeah, finding a job, like you said at the start, you only need one to work, but even finding that one can sometimes be quite a challenge, even with the help of network and recruitment firms and things like this. So no, absolutely. And I think the telling point there is you identified something that Amazon would be able to give you that was missing in was missing in your first iteration. And I mean, that's something which it made me interested in us having this podcast today, was the lessons that you've learned. That's what we're always looking to kind of share with the audience throughout these series, is what lessons did people learn and how did they stumble across those. And sometimes it might be experience that is, again, I would go and do this. It might just be, do you know what, I got lucky and this happened. It might be a mentor told me it. And I suppose takes me into this question. When you said the first business, it grew very well, it kind of burnt you out. Did you know at that stage, if we'd have done it slightly differently, maybe it would have gone further, maybe you wouldn't have been as burnt out because there was some skill sets missing in kind of your planning? Or was it wasn't the right time? What got you to the stage of going, A, let's wind this thing down, and B, going back to Amazon, as long as it's in this space, I'm
Mhm.
fine with that. What was that kind of epiphany moment of kind of putting it all together?
It was one moment that I ended up fracturing my foot during my startup days. And that was, I know it's just an accident and it could happen, but it came about because I lacked balance. I was pushing really hard on a startup, I was pushing in the gym, I was pushing socially. I was trying to do it all. And, something has to give. And that
Yeah.
thing was my health at the end of the day. Um, so as I reflected at that time, I thought it would have went better if I had done things differently, but I didn't know how or why. And I knew I needed time to just absorb the lessons of that experience. And, sometimes you can only tell the story looking back, but when you're in the moment, it's hard, to tell what happened. Um, Another thing maybe I should have mentioned about Amazon, it's very easy to transition within Amazon once you've built credibility. So someone like me, I'm a civil engineer by training. I have no
Mm,
business going into product or program or tech, on paper at least. But within
mm,
Amazon, once you excel at your first job, using that, you can go to this next job. And spending a year, like in my 6 years there, I did more than six roles, or maybe exactly six roles. So about a year each. And a lot of
mm.
this was progressing upwards. One or two of them were sideways into, parallel domains. I don't think there would have been a place that allows you to move that fast. In other places, it might be seen as a negative thing. Hey, why didn't he stay in that role? At Amazon, it's the norm. Like you've done this, you've mastered it in a year, time for the next challenge.
Yeah.
So that's something I really enjoyed there.
It's really interesting to hear you say that. And um, I can't mention the individual's name due to an off the record conversation I had, but there's an individual that I know that works in a very traditional industry. Um,
Mm.
but the firm they work at is one of the only firms in the industry where people move internally quite quickly into new roles, and nowhere near the Amazon pace you just described. But within sort of 2.5 years, they're getting promotions on a regular basis, and it's if you perform, it can be quite a norm, and it's really refreshing to see that, because I think every business talks about this growth, every business talks about development, but when you actually delve into the numbers, promotions take a lot longer than that normally. And I think that's something, or you get one promotion and then you're stuck in the next one for a heck of a lot longer. So I think, yeah, it's interesting to see that from Amazon. On the flip side, was that super rewarding or at what point did it feel like a strain because you're constantly learning something new and pushing yourself? Or was it just, what, I just loved every minute of it? Or was there a bit where you said, actually just a little bit slower, maybe 18 months or something, just so I can have a breather?
So it never got too much. The thing is, when I stopped learning, I got bored with what I'm doing. So I immediately looked to the next thing. And in other jobs, probably wouldn't have survived 6 years. But in Amazon, the moment you're done with the position you're in or you want something else, you can actually make it happen quickly if you have the track record to show for it. Did I love every minute of it? Absolutely not. Come on. That's a dream that nobody will achieve. Even at a startup, I'm chasing my dreams right now. But do I love everything I do? No, some things just need to get done. And at Amazon, you know, as amazing the culture was, it did get bureaucratic at times, and there is some red tape that bothered me at the time. But towards the end of my career, as I transitioned to corporate, the pace got lower. Operations was the most intense. I led teams, sometimes 100 people plus, reporting directly to me. And towards the end at corporate, I didn't have anyone reporting to me. So for me, going from 100 to zero, just managing myself, that's amazing. No matter how hard the job is, for me, I'm cruising.
Was that then the double-edged sword of it was almost too comfortable?
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. So it got really comfortable. I didn't feel like I was doing my best anymore. I didn't feel like I was learning. In fact, I felt like I was learning the wrong things. I was learning how to navigate company culture, how to progress, how to play the politics game. And those
Yeah.
are skills, you might become a president navigating politics, but it's not for me. I'm a business guy. Um, so I noticed that the things I love are going down and the things I don't like to do are becoming more important. So I thought, okay, time for the next challenge. And it took some time to figure out what the next path will be. I left sometime last year, so more than a year ago, and took a few months off soul searching until, the next destination became attractive enough for me to pursue.
And you mentioned something there that I always find really interesting is your statement around the things you loved were diminishing and the things you disliked or had to do, were less passionate about, were increasing. How did you, at what point did you notice that? And the reason I ask this is it's actually an exercise I mention a lot with candidates to look at the best and the worst role they had. What are things that they really enjoyed and disliked, and look for the traits within them. And there's a whole exercise around this, and it's part of career coaching and so on. But how did you notice that? Or was it just an epiphany one day, you just went, all of a sudden you realized I am a lot less happy than I was, and then you reflected back? Or how did you get to that moment to realize I'm no longer doing ABC and I love that stuff? How did you get to that point?
It didn't happen overnight, but I started noticing that it's taking me effort to get the job done. It's taking me active, conscious effort to manage myself. And when I looked deeper into it, I realized that a lot of the joy I was getting in the first, let's say, four, 4.5 years out of the 6 was building teams, getting them to a very high performance, scaling them, launching new things. So it was all about building and scaling. And the
Yeah.
moment I lost that and my job was more about managing an existing thing or more, you can describe it, but less leadership, less scaling, less building, and more about maintaining and doing the things that are supposed to be done because it's part of your job. I realized, and it's not fun. I operate much better when I'm having fun, as we all do. So it was my duty and my responsibility to pursue the fun. And I say that to anyone watching. If you're hating where you're at, nobody's gonna come save you. You gotta take the plunge. You gotta walk, you gotta step into the unknown. And it's very uncomfortable, I know, but that's why we should do it. And because if it's easy, everyone would do it. So I advise everyone to not wait until you have 100% certainty or even 80%, because it may never come. And don't wait till you're 100% ready, because guess what? You never will be. And just take a plunge. Worst case, you go back to the same job a year later.
Yeah. And I think, look, it's even if, a startup entrepreneurship isn't for everybody, but even people looking at, should I leave to another job? Even within another corporate, I think that whole, or even take an internal promotion, do you put your hat in the ring? I think there is this, is there ever the right time? Do you ever have all the skills? No. And the whole point is taking a role that pushes you anyway. And I think sometimes, like you said, people can be worried, oh, I don't tick every box. The person that ticks every box either won't have the right motivation or actually longer term won't stay very long. And that's actually to the detriment of the company anyway. So it is on companies to have a wish list, but then acknowledge this person has the right drivers to fill in the gaps, i.e. you then need to put your hand up. So yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think it's just the companies need to get the balance right on seeing the underlying talents to help that person grow, for sure. So coming from your background where your father ran, from the ground up, ran his own business, did that has that added extra pressure on you to be an entrepreneur? Has that added extra pressure on you to achieve different things, or is it just, like you said, you experienced it and now you're doing your own journey? Does it weigh on you? Does it inspire you? Or is it just not in your mind at all? I mean, that's always an interesting one.
Oh, fantastic question. Definitely adds to the pressure, but it's not because of him. It's because of me. And
Okay.
I recognize that if he didn't have the courage to step into the unknown, and at that time we're talking about decades ago when the unknown was traveling, there's no YouTube to check what Dubai looked like. There's nobody, there's no forum, there's no video calls. He stepped into the unknown, started some shit he had no business doing, and as a result, I get a chance for a much better future. I got a chance to chase my dreams. I got a chance to go to Canada and get, the best education and the best privilege. So I recognize it's a privilege. And I wonder, like, if he did that with what he had, then I have a moral responsibility to do what I can with what I have. And what I have is more than what he did. So if I don't do this, I feel bad. I feel like, if we don't fulfill our potential, or at least try, there's
Yeah.
honor in trying and failing more than there is in not trying. So I'm completely comfortable with failing, but I'm not comfortable with not trying.
It's a really good point. And again, it goes back to whether that's a project, whether that's sport, whether that's
Everything.
on entrepreneurship, everything is, don't be afraid to give it a go. And that's even down to my kid doing some homework she doesn't want to do. It's like, don't worry if you fail. Like, honestly, that is a discussion that is an ongoing one at the moment in my house. So I think, yeah, it's a really hard thing, or really important thing to try to get across to everyone in their life. So no, absolutely. So from Amazon, we kind of said, look, there are things you loved, there are things that you didn't, and that's the same with any job, and that's fine. But what are the things that you took from Amazon, or that you've tried to take from Amazon, that you want to instill in your own firm? I.e., what are the best bits from a culture, from a growth, from a whatever it might be? What are the things that you want to try and get into your own firms, or replicate into your work experience, your life, others' experience that work for you? What are the things you can try and take from that into your own?
There's a lot. Obviously, they're doing something right. Otherwise, they wouldn't achieve what they've done. The
Mm.
first thing that comes to mind is data-based decision making, or the ability to let the data guide you rather than other things. And like I said earlier, it could become a fault. You could just obsess over the metrics and forget what the information is actually doing. Sometimes I'm guilty of that too. But number one would be the data. Number two is bias for action, which is short for just get shit done. If you have something that takes less than 5 minutes, don't wait. Don't put it on a to-do list. Just spend the 5 minutes and get it done. And online, there's the 2-minute rule, which is very similar. And I try to instill that in my team also, and the people we onboard to the company. Like, I want the only advantage that makes a startup able to beat big companies is speed of execution and the speed, the agility of how you can change direction completely, literally overnight, and pursue a completely different thing. And that comes from individual actions. It's not magic. You're not fast by design. It comes from not waiting on things, just getting them done. And the best way to get new information is action. If you're not sure, just take action. It'll either work or it won't, and you'll learn something that didn't work. So information comes from action. Reading is great. I love reading, but
Yeah.
my one of my resolutions for 2024 was not to read any books.
Okay.
Why? Because the ratio of reading to doing has to be right. The year before that, or maybe I've read 20 or 30 books. And guess what? I was at Amazon fulfilling my intellectual curiosity with reading, decided to stop and channel that to action. And I made more mistakes last year, which is good. And that led me here, launching a startup, being much happier in what I do. And yeah, make mistakes, take action, the information will come. There's no perfect information anywhere.
Yeah. And I think that that feeds like into you said, don't wait for 100%, even 80% sometime. Side question then, based on 2023, not 2024. What was your best book of 2023 then? What would be the book you'd say to anybody, go read this? It was an absolute cracker.
Oh, there's a lot. I have a list of my top 30 books on my blog somewhere. But if I were to choose one, mm, really, one fiction and one non-fiction. The fiction
Yeah.
would be Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, and it's really
Okay.
hard to put it into words, but it was one of the most engaging fictional books I've read that tells the story of humanity in a very unique way. And for
Okay.
anyone that's considering it, just read the first page. And if you don't like it, don't continue. That's all I advise you. And it's available online. If you Google the name PDF, you'll find the PDF online because it's very old.
Okay.
That book blew my mind, honestly. Um, Non-fiction, have you heard about it, by the way, Ishmael?
I've not. I would be looking this up afterwards. Yeah, I have not heard of it.
Just read the first
It's
page.
okay. I'll drop you a
Easy.
message. I'll drop you a message after this and let you know.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you
Yeah.
think.
Okay. And so
Non-fiction,
non-fiction.
there's a lot, but I would go for The Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins, I believe. Um, Again, it changed my perspective on everyone's motivation. Before that, I thought people were crappy sometimes. After reading The Selfish Gene, I realized we're programmed. We have our in our DNA to pursue some things, and if we don't do them, we're not human. So now I look at people in a much more empathetic way because I get it. I get even the shitty things I get, and I've done many shitty things too. And that book helped me open my eyes. I thought it was intentional, but people are just people and they will always remain people, and you got to accept it or suffer a lot internally.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so we touched on the good stuff you took from Amazon.
Hmm.
What's the what's the thing that you don't want to bring from Amazon to your business? And that may be that doesn't mean it's a bad practice. It just may be something that doesn't work in your firm or what you want to be, or it works there, but it's not part of my DNA, whatever it is. So this isn't a going aggressively and saying something negative about Amazon, but what is the thing that you don't want to bring across to your business? I think that'd be quite interesting to know.
It's not my job.
Okay. Oh,
So,
the famous phrase. Oh my God. It's not my job, or it's not
so
in my job, or not in my job description. That's the best one.
yeah, so actually Amazon did very well. There's very defined accountability for every person, and that's great. Every task you have, you know exactly who's responsible. But guess what? It means for everyone else, they don't feel responsible. So you get stuck in this loop of if it's slightly outside my responsibility, I let it go. Even though Amazon has an ownership principle that they talk about a lot, but the way it's structured makes it hard to be an owner sometimes. And I think it's a corporate thing. And a lot of times we interview people coming from corporate into the startup, sometimes very high level. And it's crazy how often they get to the point where they stop thinking and they're like, okay, I'm the CTO. This is not technical, therefore I should stop thinking. And that's very dangerous. You don't never want to get there.
That's an interesting point for sure. Okay. So in terms of within the MENA region, because obviously I think all of your Amazon was Canada based, is that right? Or was the second,
US,
yeah,
yeah, North
all,
America.
all North America. Okay. So then you've come to the Middle East. You've done, was the first startup in the Middle East, or was just the current one?
Both of them.
Both of them.
So
Both
in
of them.
Dubai, the
Okay.
first one, and the second one in Saudi.
Yeah. And so looking at UAE and Saudi, and then also, yeah, let's start with that. Between the UAE and Saudi, and especially what's going on in Saudi at the minute with the growth, with everything that's happening there, have you seen which did you feel was easier to do a startup in? I mean, that's probably the best place to start, the UAE or Saudi at the minute. And again, I know things are changing, but is there,
No,
how have you compared those environments?
nowhere it's easier. They're both hard. They're both
Okay.
super hard. But if you look at very simple things, the market size in Saudi is 4 times here in terms of
Mm,
population and GDP. Another thing, the advancement, Saudi is going through the boom that the UAE already went through, maybe in 2000 to 2010, 15. So in terms of the timing, when you're a bit earlier, there's more opportunities, especially when you're in tech. So these two factors, I think, would summarize why Saudi, not UAE, this time around.
no, that makes a lot of sense. And because your current firm is more fintech focused, how are you finding the regulatory side of things? Is that very receptive? Is that a challenge? Is that something which you're working with them to? Are you working? Is the tech having to work around the regulatory, or how's that kind of positioning? Yeah.
No, good question. I've been very lucky with my co-founder who's done fintech twice before. One of the companies running still successfully, but he's no longer, the CEO.
Hmm.
So he knows how to navigate these things. But in one word, we started talking to the regulators before we started designing the product. And kudos to them. We had multiple conversations with multiple people from the regulatory authority SAMA in Saudi, and we know exactly which pieces of information we should uh, stay away from to ensure we don't violate that and need a license and stuff. So we're purely a tech company. We're not
Mm.
provide. It's a fintech, of course. We're enabling financial services, but we don't provide any financial services. We're only technical provider. And it's very important to make that distinction because the difference between them could be an extra year or two and a few million dirhams or reals to get regulated. So we're very careful about that. We defined the problem, understood the regulation very well. Thanks to AI, you can summarize, digest, all those legal codes and be able to like concisely know where you stand. And yeah.
Mm. Okay. That's. I mean, that's the biggest thing, isn't it? Do you have a clear vision and mission, and therefore you work within the regulatory side of things, but then you also know where does innovation start and stop. And I think that
Mhm.
that's the interesting part. And so from the ecosystem of the MENA region, so UAE, Saudi, and so on, what have been the things that you're most excited about from this part of the world? Because there are a number of things it really does lead compared to other parts of the world, and I just think it'd be really interesting to see from your own experience. What are some of those kind of, hey guys, this region's got these XYZ really good, they've nailed it down really well. And then on the flip side, what would be an area where it'd be great if they could develop this further? Do you have that kind of perspective?
I would say ambition is there. Like, if you go back just 20, 30 years, where we are now in the Gulf is pretty crazy. Like, they've been able to go so far, and it starts with vision. It sounds very cliche to say, but if you don't think you can do it, you've already lost very well with startups. We're also pursuing some crazy shit that should not, work really. If you think about it logically and statistically, we shouldn't be doing this, but we are, and it's going to work because that's our vision, and we'll do everything we can to get there. And most of the time, things do work out one way or the other. So that's what attracts me to it. You don't get the same energy in North America, Canada, and the US, even though the US has been responsible for most of the tech innovation of the last 20 years, but I didn't feel that vibe. One thing we can do better, if we can somehow standardize or aggregate the Gulf into one region, and they've already started doing that in terms of the Gulf visa. I don't know if you know, but there's a Gulf visa you don't need to apply to. Yeah, so if we can do more of that, like a lot of the culture is the same, a lot of the ways people operate are the same, but each country has its own, like the Schengen, how they unified it. I think that will really accelerate innovation here.
This is a really good point, especially around the Schengen visa. I think that's a really good. It's always good when you can point to something and say, look, the benefit here, do our own version, do it better, see the benefit, and take it from there. I think that's interesting. So looking at Amazon, looking at startups, looking at your families, the business and things, what are some of the techniques? What are some of the setbacks? What has been some of the ways you've built resilience to overcome some of those setbacks? And like I said, corporate setbacks, family setbacks, your startup setbacks. How have you kind of built that resilience? What's some of the lessons that you've learned? And again, what would you do different if you could do your time again? And I know you're still on this journey, but I think it's always interesting to do that reflection piece of saying, yes, technically that got me to where I am, but on reflection, if I could have done it a bit different, maybe I could be here a bit faster. Maybe I could have done it a bit different. There's a bit of chicken and egg to that, I know, but I'm just always intrigued to know what those sort of lessons learned have been so far.
I think something that I did badly in my 20s, it worked sometimes, but is thinking I know all the answers. And it's good sometimes to feel like that. The difference is right now, I know I don't know the answers, so I do a very good job in finding the people that know the answers and talking to them and being very meticulous in arriving to the answer. And I think there's a difference between, I thought confidence is always knowing the answers, but I don't think so anymore. I think confidence is actually being able to be self-aware enough to know where you should make the decision and where you should consult somebody better than you. And this applies to the company. At some point, there might be someone who's better suited for your role. You need to be comfortable with stepping back or stepping sideways and letting the company prosper without you.
No, 100%. And I think that comes into a little bit of listening, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of growth.
Soft skills.
It's that. Yeah, soft skills is probably the best way to put it. It's the unspoken kind of. It also is a little bit of experience as well. You gain that experience to know when you need the help. You gain that experience to know there's no harm in saying I can't do this bit. I think there's a lot to be said about saying no as well. And I think that's something which I've learned, over the years of the career is there's a lot to be said when you sit in a meeting and say, we do not do X and Y, but we will absolutely nail A, B, and C. Because a lot of people don't do that either. They try and say they can do everything or things like this. So I think, again, yeah, it's a really important point you've raised there. It is that maturity and confidence listen, say
Uh,
no, and have that empathy piece for sure.
You
That's a
you
really
got
good
it.
one.
I
Mm.
100% agree. Soft skills was the difference. I don't think I'm smarter than my 20s. I think my IQ is completely same, but it got amplified by the soft skills that I gained. And sometimes as engineers or business people, we don't understand that it's what actually makes or breaks you as a person. It's not how smart you are, how much, knowledge you gain. It's how you can handle yourself. And yeah, soft skills are the way to go. You can't build a business without it. Never.
And are there specific, let's go, maybe failures is the wrong word, but are there specific lessons, projects, failures, setbacks that you could point to that say, I learned more in this one instance than I did over, 10 things that went my way? Is there one or two that really stand out to say these were huge learnings because of these the lessons of it not going right were much more meaningful? Is there a couple that stand out?
Yeah, definitely. The when things go right, I don't learn too much. I don't learn
Mm,
anything when things go the right way. I only learn when things go badly, or Um, one one thing that was very life defining for me is, and it caused me to lose my first business, and is health, or the incident itself is not the main point. It's the lack of balance in life, not prioritizing my health as much as I prioritize the business. Now I understand that you know, the best investment you can do in your business is taking care of your health. And that's not only, going to the gym. I was going to the gym and I was stronger than I am now. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about balance,
oh yeah.
balancing your four pillars of health: physical, mental, social, and spiritual, which is spending time with my lovely partner. This is something, I look forward to every day.
Mm.
Shout out to her. She might be watching this. And spending time with my family and my friends. Like,
Yeah.
those are the things that keep me going after 12-hour, 14-hour work days. After this call, I'm gonna go and have dinner with my wife and her parents, and I absolutely am looking forward to that.
Yeah. No, it's really important that, and I think this is again part of what actually drove us to do this podcast series was the learnings from people. And um, while over all of these episodes, there are a number of different ideas that people have or learnings that people have gone through, the underlying bit that is the consistent is that balance piece for the mental health piece. And you can dress up in other ways. You can say there's certain, a bit more of this, a bit less of that, but I think that piece is really critical. And I myself, I know probably 2.5 years ago or so, um, I didn't have that balance right. And that triggered, in a good way, a bit of a process restructure of the business, which actually meant a better balance for myself. And ironically, meant that the business actually did substantially better in terms
There you
of
go.
out. Yeah, did better for the client, did better for the candidate, did better for our process, and did better for the bottom line as well. And I actually had much more better life balance. But I think it is that you kind of need to. It's how do you take that step back? I mean, that's the how do you get to that moment? And I think that's something which I hope through things like this podcast, it helps people maybe get to it before they get to the edge. I think you speak to people and they discuss about being on the edge and kind of this is what pulled them back. Let's try and make sure we can let's try and let people hear this before they get to the edge because not everybody steps back. And I think that's the bit which is really interesting. And especially in, I think, being an expatriate, um, you don't have quite the same family network here as you would in your home country, because you maybe don't have all of your family here, is in maybe your parents and your grandparents and all that. They may not be in the same country and things, and that there's all that balance and things. So it's a very telling point, is the bit I'm trying to get at there. um
Definitely.
Yeah. And so for you then, what's driven you? And we've kind of touched on this, but I don't think we've asked it in quite this way. What's driven you to go again for this second business? What are you trying to, what is the end goal? And that might just be grow a business. That might be do something different than my dad did. That might just be there's a problem that I'm trying to solve and I get a buzz from that. What is, or it might be a bit of all of this, but what's the kind of, what drove you to this business, and what's the kind of, what would make you define success from this further down the line?
I love this game. I love the day-to-day of it, even the things I don't enjoy. I love being able to build something from the ground up. I love getting a team assembled, and together we can do stuff that we would have never imagined, or been able to do on our own. So I enjoy that part of it, like day to day, even the mundane. And there is a lot of mundane, like there's a lot of legal work, admin work that doesn't sound sexy, but I enjoy the process, really. I
Mm,
love being part of the game. So there is no end game. Of course, there are some favorable outcomes, which is to, be able to have full freedom, both time and financial, maybe, in the next 10 years,
mm,
and be able to travel with my wife, enjoy our time, and, do things that are fun, like you doing this podcast, doing things that are like completely not commercial and maybe for no reason, maybe helping people. So I
yeah.
look forward to that, but without putting in the hard work now, I wouldn't enjoy doing that. Like I want to take that, later. For now, I want to play this game, and the game of business gets me going. I really love it.
Okay. No, that's cool. Yeah, I like the idea of the game of business as well. I think it's a nice way to put it.
Yeah,
Um, so in terms of the business at the moment, obviously we discussed there's a very careful distinction of, due to regulatory reasons, very clear in what you do and don't do. What part of the business you're doing? Because I know you speak about a lot about solutions and service. How does the customer journey factor into the product and the service that you're trying to put together? Because I think that's always an interesting one from a business perspective, especially from a sort of founder's perspective of the product wins you business, but if the customer isn't dealt with in a certain way, it doesn't matter how good the product is. I'm just intrigued. How do you kind of marry the two up between, yeah, how do you kind of get that balance, and ultimately what's kind of the, for you, what does customer service look like to grow that further?
definitely. The user journey is key. Actually,
Mm,
just earlier today, before this, we were with our CPO, our Chief Product Officer, and we were mapping out a very small part of the journey. And sometimes, and that means we've talked in our case, the customers are not just the end users that get the car financing, but also the banks that use our technology and the merchants that sell cars. So we actually have three different users. And before we even start designing what the solution should be, we talk to a lot of them. Like we're talking multiple banks, multiple dealership, dozens of people. We understood their pain points very well. Then based on that, we designed a solution. We didn't try to invent some new technology because it sounds cool. Like we're trying to solve the problem in the best way possible. So even if we don't need, let's say we don't need AI for a specific person, we're not going to use it. We need to solve the problem, and we start with the customer first and foremost. Um, and yeah, it's all about that. This is another thing that I got from Amazon, actually, customer obsession. And I think Amazon does a better job taking care of their customers sometimes than their employees, but there's a lot to learn there.
yeah, that's, it's probably is a good and bad thing. A good to be customer focused, maybe bad to be, as you kind of
Yeah,
touched on, maybe too customer focused, if that's such a
exactly.
thing. So what do you see as the biggest misconception in, let's say, the region when it comes to the fintech space, or specifically the product service offering that you're trying to provide within the fintech space? So either fintech as a whole or the product that you're trying, the problem you're trying to solve, what have you seen as some of the biggest misconception from the customer, the user standpoint, that's the hurdle to overcome?
So right now, the car financing experience in Saudi is a bit of a nightmare. And from all our conversations with many different parties, I think people are just used to it. And the reality is the technology has evolved, and that's not only isolated technology, but the infrastructure of the country itself, including open banking, the ability to connect APIs. Most government services have APIs ready to integrate. So people are not able to visualize that it doesn't have to be this way. And this is the opportunity we see, and we're going to capitalize on. And that's a good thing. If it was obvious, maybe others would do it. Maybe someone will watch this and think, oh yeah, he's right. Maybe we should compete with them. And you know what? You're welcome to. We know what we're doing. We love competition. And it's all a game that we enjoy playing. So come on right in.
And do you see, so obviously car dealerships, a lot of those will be part of family-owned businesses, and obviously we're seeing in the region a lot of family businesses moving into second and third generation, and so the younger sibling is taking over and coming with new ideas, thoughts, etc. Does that make it even more of an exciting time, or does that make it an additional layer of difficulty because there's almost like an extra layer of governance and compliance due to these businesses going through their own transitions, as it were?
So people are people. Yeah, everything you mentioned is true. Does make things sometimes challenging. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, especially when you're trying to do uh, ambitious stuff, people are people. And at the end of the day, there's a human sitting somewhere that's gonna decide or, help you get to where you want to be. So you're right, some things are changing, but what we're seeing is, people are very techno positive, if that's a word. They have seen over the last 10, 20 years how technology has transformed small pieces in their life. And we believe there's a huge shift in consumer behavior where we're no longer just satisfied with the digitization of services. We want the services to come to us in a regular user journey. I don't need to leave my app to get a financial service. I want to get the financial service into the app, what's called embedded finance. And we think there's a huge, huge opportunity, not just in car financing, but across the board, many different verticals and many different banking products that are ripe for disruption if you just keep the user first and make shit easy for them.
You should have a chat with Claire, who we did a podcast with who went live just before Christmas. So she'd done a lot of payment services with different telecom providers in the UK, and she's done some advisory stuff. Some of the stuff you're saying there is very on point with her way of thinking. It's interesting to hear you say that. So in terms of partly Saudi changing, partly the region changing, partly technology itself changing, how do you see over the next, say, 5 years or so, leadership needing to adapt and change? So as partly our working style, partly people's behaviors from a consumer standpoint, customer standpoint, etc. What do you see as the challenges that leaders need to be thinking of to stay ahead of the curve from a people perspective? So their own talent, making sure, and I don't mean talent shortages, but I mean looking after your talent from a human capital perspective. How do you think leadership is having to adapt and change to look after your employees?
I think we have to recognize that people innately love to learn and love to explore new things. But if you always are trying to do things in a certain way and your answer to why is because we've always done it this way, then by default your people are not going to do anything special. So I think we have to lead by example as leaders on the business level. If you see a new way of doing stuff, like let's say a new tool that makes your recruitment process easier, try it. You don't need to transition to it immediately, but probably has a free trial for 7 days. Try it for a day. Put one of your best people on it and tell them to just explore it for a day. Invest in the new technologies because things are changing so fast that the only constant right now is change. And if you resist that, even slightly, then good luck. I don't know where you're gonna be. What do you think,
Yeah.
Oliver?
No, 100%. And I think, part of that journey I touched on about our sort of 2.5 years ago making changes, part of that was within our tech stack. And that's kind of an ongoing thing as well. So it is partly process, it is partly team structure, it is partly the tools we use to do that. And I think the bit that always makes me smile a little bit from a recruitment perspective is people are still very much people. It sounds a very overstatement, but I think there is fundamentally something which AI will enable certain things to be done faster, but it will not take at the point where AI takes over recruitment completely. There are a number of other industries that are completely decimated because the world is a completely different place. And I think that's the interesting part is it will change certain roles or certain aspects over time. And you need to be adapting to that. But I think when people say, oh, recruitment will be, AI will take over recruitment, I'm like, the day that AI completely takes over recruitment, there's probably bigger problems for the world because a lot of other industries will have gone as well. And we need to, as a society, look at much bigger things as well. So I think that's maybe a bit philanthropic as a thought process, but I think it's an interesting one to see kind of where I think the world goes to, because for every problem we're solving, I think we're probably creating another one. We're creating a problem for solving one. So I think it will be interesting to see how the world continues to adapt and evolve. But it's interesting. I think there's a lot of fun times ahead. But yeah,
So
interesting to
interesting.
see.
I'm looking forward. It's hard to predict where things will be, but I'm really excited for the future.
Yeah, I'm listening to uh, a book at the minute, and it's so obviously through Audible. So listen to a book at the moment, and it's one of the guys that was involved in the deals with SoftBank. So in terms of that whole story that went on there, the investment and everything else. And I'm early in the book at the moment, but there's a crazy stat that I didn't realize that Yahoo back in the day had the opportunity to buy Google for $1 million and didn't do it. You just think, oh my gosh, like it's the craziest stat I think you could ever hear. You know,
Insane.
yeah, it's like SoftBank had the opportunity to purchase for just $100 million, 20% of Amazon, which would have at today's market value been something like 300 billion or something stupid, or whatever it was, 30 billion, and a crazy X increase. And at the time it was considered risky. So nobody approved the deal. It's hindsight is a wonderful thing, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see where we are. So for you then, looking back on your kind of journey so far, what have been your biggest learnings to date in terms of I'm so glad I experienced XYZ because I can now do ABC better, more effectively, or I can go into this journey to understand the customer better or whatever it might be. But what are 1, 2, 3 sort of standouts, good, bad, ugly, difficult, whatever things were, but situations that you learned the most from? What were a couple of those?
So one of them we already talked about the
Mm.
health injury, and that made me more balanced.
Yep.
I think experiencing corporate at a very high level, which is at a company that I think is doing really innovative stuff at Amazon, that
Mm.
was really good because if I didn't, I would have always wondered what if, like how maybe that's the right job for me, maybe that's my dream job. So now I know it's just a job at the end of the day. Um, I also enjoyed like falling in love. I think it's changed my perspective on many things, and it's easy to talk about balance when it's easy to talk about it, but when you have someone that you're attached to, that's your life partner, it puts everything else into perspective. And like, well, no matter what happens, okay, we're healthy, we have the most important thing. Nothing else matters. The money will come and go always. So I think, you know, love changed my perspective on life.
That's
And
nice.
working for Amazon and startups, both of them are important. And I would recommend everyone try to build something, even if it's not a startup. I think it will open your mind also to some new worlds that you may not like. You may like, you may not, but it's a good experience. So you'd never wonder what if.
Yeah, no, 100%. And in terms of when you're building teams, and kind of know what your answer to this is going to be, but I still want the audience to kind of hear this. When you're building people that are your core team that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis versus your remote team that are not part of the core day-to-day, do you look at different do you look for different traits within them, and does your leadership style dramatically change? I.e., the core people, I must see ABC in them and I must give them XYZ. And within the remotes, and I don't mean remote staff like we have staff that I see day to day in person. I have staff that I work with every day that are in other offices. So I still consider those to be core members of staff that have the same traits. But there are other people where we don't deal with them on a day-to-day basis, and therefore there are different expectations on them and things. What's your kind of philosophy on that from an Amazon perspective, from a startup perspective? What are those different traits that you look for between the core staff and then the non-core staff? I think that's always an interesting balance to sort of get an idea on.
I think the big two categories of people, or how I evaluate employees, is leadership versus IC, or individual contributor. Because I think the skill set are sometimes the opposite. Something you would really like to see in a leader, you may not want to see in someone who's supposed to be focused on one task. But for leaders, I think the ability to grow others, and not in a pressureful way, but not in a push way, but in a pull way, like making them hungry or excited to work on something that they care about. And it's a challenge sometimes. Sometimes you're doing boring stuff and you gotta, get them excited for. So I think your ability to inspire people towards action is so underrated. If you have that, you'll figure out everything else. And as a leader, also, never saying I don't know. I mean, and I don't mean it in no, you should know everything, but you should know what the next step is if you don't know something. Do you need to talk to someone? Do you need to experiment? Do you need to, you need to have a plan in place even when you don't know. And I think that
And
distinguishes good leaders from bad ones. Go ahead. What do you
yeah,
think?
I was going to say you need an idea where to go get an answer. I mean that's
Yes,
the you don't need to know the answer. You just need to know where might that answer come from. And I think that's an
that's a good
important thing for
way
sure.
to put it.
Mm, yeah. Okay. So look, in terms of A, I could chat all night. B, you mentioned you're going for dinner shortly, so at some point your wife's going to be probably knocking on the door, going, "Come on, I want to go for dinner." So I don't want to keep you all night. Um, but I think today we've covered some really interesting stuff, and I think your journey's really unique, and especially kind of going back, a little bit of burnout, a little bit of going back, a little bit of having the emotional intelligence to say I'm going back, but I'm learning new skills, taking that into what you're doing now, the uniqueness of your background from the family and your father and things. Taking all of this into account, if you were to kind of give a couple of sound bites to people, and these can be, very short or longer, but what would be your kind of two or three kind of key takeaways for people? If you were to say, right, if you're in a corporate XYZ, if you're doing a startup ABC, you as an individual or you as mental health, just as an idea, but what would be your kind of two or three takeaways that you would say to people if you just take these away from today, they're really going to help you as an individual grow, or step back from the edge quicker, or not get to the edge as we discussed earlier and things. But what would be those sort of two or three things that would be your kind of key takeaway messages, and kind of be great to use those as a kind of a wrap up for today. Yeah.
Health related, I wouldn't advise anyone to work out. That will not be my advice. But I advise you to record all your activity, whether you get a smartwatch that's $20 like this one, or you just record it manually, however you want. And I think just tracking your health metrics by itself could be a New Year's resolution because it's very low effort. And guess what? When you're tracking everything, eventually you'll look at it and eventually want to improve something.
Yeah.
So track your health. Second, as it pertains to business, fail more and fail faster.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you think failure is a good thing or not, Oliver?
I think failure is. I think the interesting bit is knowing when to pull the plug so you don't go too far. And I mean, technically you can fail early or fail late. And I think failing late can be a problem. Failing early is not a problem. And that does feed into your failing fast is fine. I think I suppose the follow-up question, although we were looking at your closing messages, but what would be how did you gain the confidence to know, yeah, we can pull the plug on that idea, as opposed, so yes, do it fast, but how did you get to that stage where, yeah, I'm pretty confident we can move on from this?
I'm not confident that we can move on.
Okay.
I don't know. You just have to make a call and stick with it and adapt quickly. If it's working, you need to be honest and say it's working. We need to do more. If it's not working, great. You figure out a way that doesn't work. Now try something else. So I never really fully know, but I think getting to a 60% confidence is enough to make most decisions, especially the big one, the big ones in business.
Yeah. Or at the very least start adapting and then, and then you kind of A/B testing. Yeah.
Exactly. And maybe fail fast. Like, I'm not saying fail miserably. Like, don't bet all your money on Bitcoin, even though Bitcoin is going to, maybe it'll work. But I'm saying fail quickly and stay at the edge of failure. So dip into it, go back, adapt, dip into it. So stay close to the line. If you have not failed at anything in the last 30 days, then I don't know what you're doing. You're not growing for sure.
You're doing your second stint at Amazon and just cruising.
Yeah. If you're failing, and it doesn't have to be miserable, you don't have to lose your house to do it. Like, have calculated risk assessment. Always think what's the worst case scenario. And most times the worst case is like not too bad. Nobody's gonna die. You're gonna be fine. Life goes on. Maybe that's the last thing I would leave with is like genuinely ask yourself, what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? And if the answer is not too horrible, then maybe you should do it.
Yeah, I mean that's really, really good. And the kind of the final bit I'd kind of stick on there, which links to your understanding where that line is. There's a number of sort of different mental health groups that I'm kind of, part of and so on and so forth. And I think it's a shame when you see these people where they kind of send a message like, I have completely hit rock bottom and blah, 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 blah. What should I do from here? Of course, you always try and help. But I think it's so refreshing when you hear somebody saying, me and my partner have discussed and we are confident that this won't work out. Now, how do we exit out of this? And they're kind of asking for that advice before they're at the bottom because they know it's coming. And I mean, there's a lot to be said about that kind of emotional intelligence part. And it's, again, that fail quick, as in you don't need to get all the way to the bottom to know it's not going to work. So therefore change it or get out of it. And I mean, that's probably the biggest lesson that I would love people to take away from today is like you said, fail fast, but you don't need to. Failing doesn't mean that you're all the way at the bottom. And I think that's a really critical one. So that's
sorry but one last thing. Failing does not mean you're a failure. There's an important distinction to keep in mind. Failing is a descriptive word. you assign to a project or task. I have failed at this business venture. A failure is an internal, very dangerous. So please separate them both. You can fail every day. You can bet, you can win 51% of the time and be the richest man in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a really good way to put an end on today. So look, from my side, thanks so much today. I hope the listeners have had really enjoyed this as well. Please do like and subscribe, do share this content further. And, again, Alan, thanks so much today. Really enjoyed it. And we'll catch up again soon, and you have a good day, and go enjoy dinner, mate.
Thanks, Oliver. It's been really fun, and all the best to you, and we'll be in touch for sure.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.